It can often be a struggle to get enough data for a machine learning project. However, sometimes you have too much data and you have to select a subset of examples for training. So how do you go about selecting that subset? Let's consider as an example Google search. At what granularity would you sample its massive amounts of data? Would you use random queries or random sessions or random users? Well, the correct answer depends on the problem you're trying to solve. What do you want to predict and what features do we want? So for example, if we are trying to use a feature called previous query, you would need to sample at the session level because sessions contain a sequence of queries. However, if you are using a feature called user behavior from the last week, you would need to sample at the user level. Additionally, you usually also would have to filter out any personally identifiable information, and you may also have a policy that requires you to remove infrequent features. And this type of filtering will skew your distribution because you lose information in the tail, that is the part of the distribution with very low values that is far from the mean. And this filtering is helpful because very infrequent features are hard to learn. And another potential issue that you should look out for is imbalanced data. And if you're dealing with a classification data set with skewed class proportions, this is called imbalanced. And what do we mean by imbalanced? Well, if you consider an example where you're building a model that detects fraud, and instances of fraud might happen just once per 200 transactions in your data set, then that means that only about 0.5% of the data is positive and contains an example of fraud. But why would this be a problem? Well, with so few positive examples relative to the negative ones, the training model will spend most of its time on negative examples and not really learn from the positive ones. For example, if you had a batch size of 128, most batches would have no examples of fraud in them, and so you could have a problem when you're training your model. So when faced with an imbalanced data set, the best approach is to first try training on the true distribution and see how it performs. And if the model works well and generalizes, then you're done. If not, you can try downsampling and upweighting techniques. And those are approaches that will be taken by your team. And so product managers do not have to get into the details, but they do need to generally be able to understand these considerations and be able to identify potential red flags when discussing activities like sampling data. And after collecting your data and sampling where needed, the next job is to split the data into two segments for testing and training. And it is very important not to test your model with the same data that you used for training. And the ratio of the two splits should be approximately 70 to 30 or 80 to 20. And this means that your training data should account for 70% to 80% of the rows in your dataset, and the other 20 to 30% of the rows should be for your test data. And it is vital to split your data by rows and not columns. And before you split your data, it's also important that you randomize all rows in the dataset, and this helps to avoid any bias in your model, as your original dataset might have been arranged sequentially depending on the time it was collected or some other factor. And unless you randomize your data, you may accidentally omit important variants from the training data that will cause unwanted surprises when you apply the trained model to your test data. Unfortunately, libraries like scikit provides a built-in function to shuffle and randomize your data with just one line of code. And of course, that will typically not be done by the product manager. But as a practical consideration, product managers also should ensure that whatever randomization approach is used, that it is deterministic, or in other words, the team is able to then reproduce those exact same data sets. For example, if you wanted to add a new feature and see how it affects model quality, for a fair experiment, your data sets should be identical except for the new feature. And so in order to achieve this, your random number generator should allow you to reproduce those exact same data sets as many times as you need to. All right, so that was a quick look at sampling and splitting of your data. I'll see you in the next lesson.